de mudança. Quero cumprimentar a Isabela Ferrari, aqui presente, o Bruno Barata, que é o presidente da nossa comissão, a Amelia, diretora da casa, uma guerreira do processo eletrônico, enfrenta as batalhas da defesa da advocacia nesse realização desse evento. O importante é discutir os temas, para onde a gente vai, como vamos caminhar, o que será a advocacia no futuro de internet, de inteligência. Notícias, né, que nos Estados Unidos o tal do Watson já está sendo aplicado por bancos para preparação de contratos, resolver questões mais. E a inteligência artificial é algo que a gente precisa discutir, precisa enfrentar, até para que a ordem tenha a capacidade de regular esse futuro, protegendo sempre o nosso exercício profissional. Então, esse debate é bem-vindo, eu tenho certeza que será um sucesso, e eu dando boas-vindas a todos, eu vou passar a palavra aqui para o Bruno, para ele dar continuidade a essa abertura.
Obrigado, Luciano. Nosso diretor sempre aguerrido, participativo no trabalho das comissões desta casa. Bom dia a todos. Agradeço o serviço, Luciano, bem disse, nessa segunda-feira chuvosa, com bastante trânsito. Nós temos colegas aqui do Rio, também colegas que vieram de São Paulo, então agradeço a presença. E dizer rapidamente sobre o trabalho da nossa comissão, para a gente poder começar os trabalhos, que às 9h45 em ponto nós teremos uma transmissão por videoconferência com os dois palestrantes, juntamente com a Isabela, que também compõe o primeiro painel dessa manhã, que os dois palestrantes são o reitor associado do MIT, o Peter Hist, e o Paul McDonagh-Smith, que é um professor também do MIT, um falando de Boston, o outro falando de Londres. Então a gente conseguiu casar esses 3 fusos de Brasil, Estados Unidos e Inglaterra para poder preparar esse primeiro painel para os senhores. A Comissão de Relações Internacionais, ela tem um papel bastante ativo em dar a voz sobre o aspecto internacional para a OAB do Rio. Então, nós temos feito alguns convênios com entidades de classe de âmbito internacional, como a Ordem dos Advogados de Nova York. Teremos um evento no dia 20 de novembro, lá em Nova York, com a presença do presidente Felipe Santa Cruz, eu também estarei presente lá. Fizemos também uma parceria com a Ordem dos Advogados de Nápoles, e estamos em discussão também com outras ordens de advogados para firmar parcerias. A OAB do Rio também foi a única seccional a ter se filiado à International Bar Association, que é a maior associação de advogados do mundo. Não sei se todos conhecem, mas nós temos hoje mais de 100 mil membros registrados. A IBA, que é a sigla da associação, ela realiza eventos, mais de 30 eventos durante todo o ano, em todos os continentes praticamente. E a OAB é filiada a essa associação e vem participando de um debate internacional bastante relevante. E, inclusive, eu gostaria de anunciar que a IBA lançou agora, na conferência anual que foi feita em Sydney na semana passada, uma força-tarefa para discutir o futuro da advocacia. E a OAB do Rio terá um papel relevante nessa participação. Eu tenho a honra de ser membro dessa força-tarefa. Somos cerca de 30 advogados de todo o mundo e uns 40 acadêmicos das mais variadas universidades, tem Harvard, MIT, Universidade Indiana, enfim, são uma série de universidades que, em conjunto, vão iniciar o debate da advocacia, do futuro da advocacia. Então, agradeço mais uma vez a presença dos senhores e vamos começar o painel. Eu peço ao Ricardo só para colocar a tela da nossa videoconferência, para ver se nós já temos participantes aqui. O Peter eu vou cumprimentar o nosso primeiro palestrante. E desfaço a mesa também de abertura e passamos ao primeiro painel. Muito obrigado. Chegar. A gente espera o Paul chegar também? Sim, sim, também. Oi. Pode ser deixar só a Isabela ali. Só um segundinho, pessoal, só para a gente resolver esse probleminha técnico aqui do som. Vamos iniciar aqui o primeiro painel. O som está aberto já para o notebook também, Ricardo? Are you hearing me well? We're just testing the sound. No? Are you hearing me now? E meu som está saindo. O som está saindo. Está saindo a televisão dele. Mas aqui está saindo. Não, você vai falar. Certo aqui, ó. Are you hearing me now, Peter?
Faltou ativar isso, né?
Are you hearing me now, Peter?
Deve dar um delay para ele.
Não é dele.
Hello, Paul and Peter, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me, Peter? Daqui sim, mas... Hello, Peter. Are you hearing me? No? Nothing? Can you try connecting again? Foi o seguinte. Are you hearing me now? No. Cadê a Ana? Ana, por favor. Bruno, fala para ele falar nessa e conecta com outro computador para você falar com ele. Para deixar ser mais fácil. Essa complexidade aí. Eu entendi melhor aqui. people. Peter? Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry because we're trying to connect from the network, and now I'm connecting from my cell phone. But it's not the perfect way. But let's start with the questions. I'm transferred to Isabela so she can start making the questions. I'm trying to connect the network on the same time.
Okay, so connected the web before, could you see us and hear us through your system?
Sorry?
As you were, in the way you were connecting before, could you hear us and see us?
No, I couldn't.
We could see, but not hear.
Yeah.
A gente conseguia ver, mas a gente não conseguia
Yeah, I could see you, but not hear you.
Okay.
Okay? But now,
Yeah.
with my iPhone it's easier, but I can't transfer to the audience so they can see you. You're just hearing you. So I'll try to connect again with the
Okay.
with the notebook. Just one second, please.
Hi, professors. How are you? I'm fine, thank you.
I'm speaking now again from the notebook. Can you hear me or not?
Não, nem eu. Eu tô com o celular aqui, não consigo.
O som está saindo aqui.
Tá tudo liberado.
Agora fez um barulhinho.
Aqui? Yeah. Are you hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah? Não, ele está dando por aqui.
I'm not sure through which.
Yeah, Mas, Bruno, se eles te ouvem por aqui, talvez a gente possa botar um fone de ouvido aqui e eu faço a pergunta para ele, porque ela vai tentar o som dele.
Se o som da saída do fone de ouvido, esse cabo aqui, deixa o som aqui. A gente faz uma vídeo.
Entendi.
Esse cabo aqui de áudio, ele capta o áudio do notebook, eu posso ir na notebook. É P2. Não, vai. Eu tenho aqui. Mais ou menor.
Just 1 second, we are now getting a cable to connect to your phone. 1 second. Vai plugar.
Eu vou cortar o som desse fio. Quando você conectar, eu ligo.
Tá, deixa eu aqui no teste dá certo. No ouvido.
É porque eles são professores, né? Eu sempre chamo assim, mas eu não cheguei a estudar com eles, não.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, let's start. That's why we need you. But let me just present you to you. Precisarem, fique à vontade para obter os seus fones. So we're having an international video conference. So Peter here is the associate dean from the MIT Sloan School of Management, and Professor Paul McDonagh-Smith, also from the MIT Sloan School of Management, and they are speaking from Boston, Cambridge, and London. So thank you very much for your presence. And I know it's difficult for us to connect everybody, to connect England, US, and Brazil at the same time. So thanks so much again for the opportunity to have you here, speaking to us about IoT, about artificial intelligence, and other technology topics. So I'm going to transfer now to Isabela. We can start our panel. Okay? Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
No. Okay.
Tem delayzinho, né? Isabela, só você. Isso. Isso não
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, professors?
Yes, good morning.
Wonderful.
Yes, good morning.
Wonderful. Before we start, I must thank the organizers, especially Dr. Bruno and Dr. Amelia, for this great opportunity. I must say that for me it's a pleasure to be in the same panel as Professors Peter and Paul. I would like also to thank our audience for being here. So we will start with some questions. The first one goes to Peter. Peter, you're the Associate Dean for Executive Education at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Could you tell us a little about your role and your background?
Yes, thank you, Isabella, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Associate Dean at MIT's Sloan School of Management. I'm responsible for all of our non-degree short courses and programs for working executives and senior managers. We offer courses everything from 2 days up to nearly a year in length. Typically, the people who attend our courses are maybe 10 to 15 years worth of business experience, and they are essentially coming back to school to update their knowledge or to build new skills or to learn about new trends and developments that are transforming their businesses. And I came to this by a very unusual route. I started out life working in the science of physics, and so that's maybe why I became so interested in technology. And these days at the MIT Sloan School, along with my colleague Paul, we spend a lot of time thinking about how technology not only could transform business and transform the workplace, but also transforms education and the programs that we run.
Wonderful. Paul, what about you? What's your role and how did you come to work with MIT? I heard it's a great story.
Well, so firstly, it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you for this opportunity. So my role is the role of digital capability leader within the Office of Executive Education. So of course I work closely with Peter and in fact all of my colleagues within the team, but kind of more broadly across MIT Sloan as well, to actually try to design and deliver the most compelling online digital types of programs and experiences that we can. So in addition to actually creating online programs, we are very focused on ensuring that we are actually building our own capabilities and competencies as we go through that process. You know, we work very closely with a number of leading organizations on their digital transformation. And we always remember that we ourselves are subject to the same forces as all of the organizations around us. So we're very cognizant of that. As to how I actually arrived in this position, a very fortuitous, kind of unfortunate position, I had actually I'd spent 15 years with a company called Nortel, a global telecoms company. And towards the end of my career with Nortel, I had transitioned from a head of learning role into an emerging products and technology type of R&D position, where some friends and I were creating, well, really corporate world or virtual worlds for corporate use. So, you know, when you see people playing things like World of Warcraft, well, we actually took those, the physics engines from the gaming industry and converted them into collaboration platforms for business. And thankfully, Peter and the team were one of our lead kind of adopters of the technology, thankfully. So Peter, thanks again for that. And really that's how I started focusing or putting attention onto the educational kind of aspects of technology. And really, you know, that's where it all started, Isabella.
Wonderful. So I'll turn back to Peter once more. I understand that a lot of your work is helping individuals and organizations prepare for and drive transformational changes in their careers and business. And I'd like to ask you, what are the main changes that you're seeing, and how does executive education help on that?
Okay, this is kind of interesting to look back at this. Being that we're 10 years ago when I started doing this work, we used to say that the companies that were the best fit for us to work with were ones that relied on science and technology and engineering, and that narrowed down the list of companies that made sense for us to work with. Fast forward to today, and there isn't really a company or an organization that I can think of that isn't affected by and doesn't rely on technology in some important ways. So, for example, over the last few years, we've done a lot of work with companies in the financial services industry because they're really not only having their internal operations and organization transformed by IT and how they use it. In the last really just 2 or 3 years, that's also been transforming how they relate to their customers and the kinds of products and services that they're able to offer. And we see that pattern in really every industry. Another of the clients that we've started working with recently is the civil service of the British government. And they're facing challenges their whole annual ways of thinking about IT and telecoms, but technology more broadly and how that really can affect a business. It creates opportunities and it creates tremendous challenges as well. So we like to say that the companies that we work with in executive education, typically they are facing some kind of transformation, and sometimes they are driving this themselves. They know that they see an opportunity and they will come to MIT to help them to understand what are the new technologies and business models that they create, and how can they react to and get ahead of those and really be a driver of change and generating new value for their customers in their industry, or even getting into entirely new businesses. And then the other category is companies and organizations, they're not driving it so much as reacting and responding. That actually they're facing new sources of competition, both internationally and even I think in the legal profession, you can begin to see examples of that happening as well. And also new sources of competition from from new providers and new players that they hadn't even thought about as being competitors. And so that's a very significant kind of challenge as well. And they're really drawn from every industry now: financial services, manufacturing, I mentioned government, professional services, high tech, of course. But there really isn't a business or an industry that we're seeing now that isn't affected. At the same time, what we say in executive education is, oftentimes a lot of CEOs, a lot of senior executives, when they're faced with this kind of challenge or want to take this kind of opportunity, what they will do is, they'll call one of the usual management consultants and ask them what they should do. And the consulting company, and there are many good ones out there, will, research their business for them and bring their knowledge and expertise and help make recommendations of the way forward. Our approach is a little different. We think that, just like Paul described, internally ourselves, we're building our own digital capability. We think that businesses and organizations and individuals have to build their own skills. You can't just hire a consultant. It's much more effective to acquire the knowledge, acquire the skills, acquire the capabilities to invent the future for yourself and then be able to implement it. And that's really what we do.
Wonderful. You're a founding member of the Internet of Things Talent Consortium. Could you talk to us a little about what it is and how did you get involved in this project?
Sure. This is an interesting story as well. About 4 years ago, I think, I was asked by a connection at Cisco, who headed up their learning organization, to help put on a panel, much like this one, at a large Internet of Things conference that they had started the year before, the Internet of Things World Forum. There's about 2,000 C-suite executives from all over the world who are coming together to learn about, what was this Internet of Things and what did it mean for them. And just in case, I'm sure everyone now is very familiar with IoT, but very simply, it's really the result of, if you imagine through the Internet, connecting objects, machines, people, and data all together, what kinds of new opportunities and challenges does that create? So we began putting together the panel, and when we got to the event, we realized, we thought that we were going to be talking about, this was just another panel, another industry vertical, and we were going to talk about how IoT affected education, how we were using it in the classroom, for example. What we discovered when we got there, all these executives were saying, well, yes, 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 but actually our problem is not how you're using it, but we really don't have the skills in our organizations that we need, and how can you help us with that? And so it really was the answer to that question, along with Cisco and other leading companies like GE Digital and Rockwell Automation, who are coming from different parts of this problem space. The people who are making the things, the people who are making the IT and the software and the services, and educators like ourselves, to really try to understand what is this talent problem that is being faced, and can we do something to help with it? And there was a historical analogy for this, which is why Cisco, I think, was in the lead in this initiative with us. 20 years ago, and Paul, he might talk about this, came from the networking industry as well. He could confirm this. 20 years ago, Cisco and others created the networking industry, and there was no such thing as a network engineer. There was no such thing as the kind of technology that we're using right now to hopefully make this call if it's working appropriately. And still, there are clearly some challenges. But one of the things that Cisco was able to do was create the networking industry, and they created the talent pool in many ways, and the training and the certification program that were necessary for software model for building this IoT capability. On the other hand, IoT is much, much more difficult. And the reason it's difficult, and we'll get onto this a little bit, I'm sure, is that we're trying to bring together very different fields to collaborate to build that not only the networks, but the things that connect to the networks, and then how we use them and how we use the data they produce. You know, that was why the Internet of Things Talent Consortium came together. We were between these different companies and educators and governments. We had pieces of the puzzle, and we wanted to come together to try to figure out what's going on and how can we work together to really enable the kind of, or dream about, could be possible, but we're being held back by, the inability to implement, in many ways, those visions. And in fact, a recent piece of data, 75%, according to some research that Cisco commissioned, and they've got a vested interest, right, in talking up how good IoT is and what, that it's easy. Well, it's not easy. 75%, 3/4 of IoT implementation projects they found just this year do not succeed. We call it fail if they're not 100% successful. They might say that they're 80% successful, but the reality is, there are reasons that they don't succeed, and we're beginning to understand what those are.
Great, wonderful. So people say that IoT and digital transformation are going to affect every organization and industry in our world. So I'd like to know, what do you think might be the main implications for the legal profession?
Sure. I mean, I think the legal profession is in a very interesting position because one of the kinds of effects of IoT and no doubt therefore great opportunities in the legal profession is that we need very quickly new kinds of contracts and new ways of organizations working together in ways that can sort of understand and appropriately assign and share risk in these very complex projects, which sometimes can have very profound implications. You're thinking, an airliner and the jet engines on it to the internet live. You're connecting emergency services and cities and hospitals and medical equipment to the internet, and factories and power stations. Well, there are a lot of ways those can go wrong with very bad consequences. And so, in fact, one of the things that, in a positive way, I think we desperately need the help of the legal profession from, it is getting up to more sort of way of doing these things. For entrepreneurs, liability and their consumer rights kind of perspective, these all need to catch up. The same thing with all of the data that we're producing, and I know Brazil is kind of interesting in this respect. A lot of
Hi. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Não sei se eles estão ouvindo a gente. Não, porque eles vão ouvir. Ah, tá. Oito, 1734.
I hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Wonderful. So we lost our connection when Peter was starting to talk about Brazil. Could you go back to that point, please? I'm sorry?
Did you want me to go back to the beginning of my answer about the legal profession?
About what? Yeah, please.
Okay. So, as I think about what will the impacts of IoT be on the legal profession, one area I think which is very important that we need, the way that we write business agreements and manage risk and create public policy around enabling IoT has to catch up to what the technology is able to do. And so it's been a little bit like the Wild West at the moment. And there's innovators and startups and they're doing all kinds of things, connecting all kinds of things together. But you know, the risks in some cases can be very significant, and we need good contractual approaches, all consumer goods, all connected, then there's new kinds of risks that we need to make sure that we're able to manage, and that's both I think a legal practice point of view, and it's a public policy point of view as well. In that, so I think it affects, you know, we need the judiciary as well to be able to understand, you know, and help us manage these things. There's also a question in relation to all the data that the IoT creates. And I know Brazil is kind of interesting here. Unlike Europe, certainly, there's a very different attitude, it seems, a cultural attitude to your individual data and how that may get used. And, you know, I think the way that the legal profession can either enable or inhibit the development of these businesses based on how the data gets used is important. Then the other kind of role that I think the legal profession in the way that it affects the other profession and business is actually how it enables you to perform your business. I think everything from your now, certainly in the US, when there's any lawsuit, the amount of data and evidence that can be brought to bear from all of the things that people are doing and where they're doing them, and that data is being collected somewhere, and it enables people to prove and disprove all kinds of things that maybe you had to rely on eyewitness evidence in the past, and now that increasingly there's technological ways of providing that evidence, but that's very difficult to understand and perhaps easy to manipulate as well. And so to what extent does the legal profession really have to come to understand these digital sort of capabilities and how to use them? And I think the final thing is that even as to the way the legal business itself is conducted. I mean, in a sense, what we're doing now, even though maybe the 75% of the technology not working exactly. So, and the way that IoT is increasingly going to enable new ways of working and break down the barriers of distance. And so, that brings me to my final point here, that IoT is driving globalization even more. And so as a legal profession, to what extent is there a need to be able to work across jurisdictions and across boundaries? And what does that mean? It may mean that, even for the kinds of legal practices and services that were very localized in the past, now maybe you can be competed with by lower cost providers. Maybe they're not as good, but nevertheless, that's the nature of disruption. But maybe you need with legal professionals, even in quite local practice of your own, because the systems that your customers and your clients are relying on are themselves globalized.
Great, wonderful. Now turning to Paul. Paul, you have been working recently on the management implications of AI, artificial intelligence. Can you tell us a little about your work?
Yes, yes, of course. Firstly, perhaps the best way to characterize this is to refer to something that Peter said as well around the challenge of implementing, so intelligence through the lens of business management, organizational kind of strategy. We were very struck that it would, in addition to creating a program that provided key insights, we very much needed to arm the business and management population with the confidence, invent, and implement. There's a lot of information out there about artificial intelligence. Some of it may be considered as being slightly exaggerated in some areas. What we very much wanted to do was to demystify, debunk some of the things that are kind of being said about AI, to provide business managers with a clear view of what's possible today and how they can actually embrace that to drive improvements, productivity, benefits for their organizations. So what we did, we thought a good place to start would be to work very closely, collaborate closely with the experts. So we hopped over the road from the School of Management into MIT CSAIL, the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And we worked very closely with key people from CSAIL. So Daniela Rust, the director of the laboratory, Patrick Winston, termed as the godfather of AI, as well as kind of leading experts in the natural language processing and machine learning types of areas. And Isabella, what we were really trying to do here was to provide that clear view, that clear perspective of what these technologies can and can't do today, and then provide the insights around how one can actually harness those technologies in the business setting. And further to another of Peter's points, not in high technology, but really across all industries and all regions. Now, of course, when we were going through this process, it also became clear that we needed to address some of the key questions from a societal and ethical or even moral perspective. That, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. So, bringing our conversation back to the topic of the legal profession, what might be some of the consequences and opportunities of AI to be in the short and medium term?
So, we've discussed AI in a number of different situations and topic areas here at MIT Sloan. And I think in very general terms, there's a tendency to overstate the short-term possibilities or impact of AI whilst running the risk of understating some of the medium to longer term potential implication. Now, in any conversation where there are extreme kind of positions kind of discussed, whether that be robots taking jobs or existential threats, we feel that it's very much part of our responsibility as well to make it clear to the business population what's possible. And I think in the short term, what we are likely to see is it's almost the use of AI for blunder stopping, yeah, for activities that reduce human error, yeah. So this is a 1 = 3 type of formula here, where man plus machine can potentially do things that neither would be able to achieve on their own. So whether that be, I remember a few days ago I saw an advert for a Volkswagen car where a father is teaching his son how to drive and the son makes some form of mistake, and before the father can kind of intervene, the car itself has put the brakes on, yeah? And so using data and recognizing patterns to be able to identify not good performance, whether that be in driving a Volkswagen or whether it's in your area or whether it's in education. I think we might expect to see a proliferation of these type of applications in the very, very near future.
Wonderful. It sounds like these two areas, IoT and AI, are not only closely related, but also part of a bigger picture of the digital transformation. What are the main challenges that you see for organizations that are thinking about digital transformation in general?
Peter, should I start? Or?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So my first comment would refer back to, again, something Peter said around the role that Cisco played in the creation of the network industry 20, 25, 30 years ago, etc. And what I'd like to kind of just draw attention to, it isn't only the certification and accreditation type in place with CCNA, CCNP, and all of those types of things, but it's actually the work that they did to create a common vocabulary and a taxonomy, yeah? And I think whether you're talking about IoT or the area of AI or technology disruption at the moment, one of the things that Peter kind of drew attention to, of course, was that this is very multidisciplinary in nature, yeah? And that is a challenge because a number of our organizations or even our industries or even our teams, we tend to kind of focus on one area. And we feel, I feel very strongly that in order to be successful in this time of brilliant technologies, we need to adopt a team of teams approach. We need to make friends outside of our normal kind of hunting grounds. We need to be able to modulate, demodulate between kind of organizational borders, barriers, etc. You know, it would be great if they weren't there, but they are. Let's be realistic. And we need to transcend those. And the way to do that is to make friendships outside of our kind of common areas or our kind of comfort zones. So we need to become kind of very comfortable in working with other areas that aren't the one that we kind of grew up in. And I think, if you don't mind me saying, that what's kind of required there is a bit of generosity of spirit as well. We have to learn how to give first, yeah, in a number of our relationships. So, you know, we get very quickly into an area of collaboration, kind of human interaction. So I think ultimately this is primarily a human question around the way that we interact, the way we approach some of the challenges. I don't know, Peter, if you would agree with...
Yes, that almost seems like an irony, doesn't it? We're talking about technology, the impacts of technology, and our conclusion is that the interactions of human beings are even more important than ever for that. I mean, I think of another dimension to this that's important to understand. It has to do with the way that change is changing. And if you think about in the past, when there's a new technology introduced, maybe a step function in improvement for that industry or even for every industry. the invention of the telephone, or even of television, the automobile. One of the things that was true at the time was if you didn't catch up immediately, you probably had a few years to catch up. And it was the same gap that you had to climb to catch back up to what you were missing. Well, what's new now is that the pace of change, the gradient of the curve, has been increasing exponentially. And what this means, it's a little hard, I'll do it with my finger, but if you think about an exponentially increasing curve, if you're not on that curve and you're still going along horizontally and not changing, you get further and further behind, and you have a bigger and bigger step to catch up. And so you don't have the option now with all of these different aspects of digital and technology transformation coming together. You don't have the option of wait and see. You have to be on the curve. You have to be able to change continuously. And in many cases, you'd like to be ahead of the curve. But in any case, this actually changes the nature of how organizations and businesses need to be. We've heard about the term agility as a software development kind of idea, but actually all businesses need to be agile. They need to be able to be entrepreneurial. They need to be able to spot threats and opportunities and react to them very quickly. They need to portfolios of opportunities so that they're, I don't know if the expression translates to Brazil. So as they are changing, they have access to a diverse diversity itself. I think that's going to be really important. You need diversity, not just as Paul was talking about in terms of different technological or business disciplines. I think you also need increasingly diversity in the sense of a more diverse workforce along every dimension you can think about, whether it's sort of the classic ones of gender and race, but also personality types and different approaches to working. Again, many organizations and companies we have this idea of a culture. And I think in the past, an organizational culture might have meant actually everybody's almost like a robot, in the sense that they all look the same. In this time of rapid changing. And so really, businesses and professional service firms have to grapple with is to realize the very, for human beings, uncomfortable fact that we can't get comfortable unless we're comfortable with constant change.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned transformational change, because your program works with companies and individuals to help them address transformational change. Could you share a couple of specific examples to help us understand how that works?
Sure. So in the context of what we do at MIT Sloan's executive education program, usually what we find ourselves talking to a company, let's say, or another kind of organization that is looking to go through this kind of transformational change. The conversation we have with them includes being sure, first of all, that there's senior executive sort of sponsorship and buy-in to the need for something to change, because otherwise things won't go very far. But then our theory is that the change, the CEO, the C-suite says, well, we used to do this, now we're going to do that. Or we're here, or we need to be there. That certainly is important in terms of creating the vision and providing the direction. But the change really happens when key leaders and managers throughout the organization change the way they behave. And so really our transformational change programs are certainly about helping people understand what the context and what the opportunities are, but then helping them understand and implement ways of thinking and acting differently themselves in response to that. So we'll typically target, in a large global or international corporation, there may be a population of several hundred, maybe even several thousand leaders and managers who are having their job titles of things like director and vice presidents and senior vice presidents, that they really these kinds of transformational changes. And so we design things that feel programs, and they're oftentimes delivered in person in classrooms. We like to bring people to MIT because they can experience what it's like to be in this rapidly changing, innovation-driven environment, and it's quite awe-inspiring and in a good way. But we also develop digital tools and resources that can be part of those programs, particularly as we're trying to roll out to larger and larger numbers of people. So they're learning in the classroom or online about the nature of the challenge. What we also do is we put a lot of effort into customizing that to their industry and their business. And so that involves doing a lot of interviewing of people within the firm and often outside the firm as well. And then Paul mentioned this as well, we make it very applied. It's very much in our DNA at MIT that we're not just about sort of knowledge for knowledge's sake, we really want to see it being applied. And so in our learning programs for these sort of transformational changes, we help the company identify projects that these executives can work on in small teams that can be helped by what they're learning in the classroom, but also really important business challenges for the company. And actually, usually they're hard business challenges. They're things that senior executives are worried about but haven't been able to figure out what to do about it. And so our faculty will help those teams think about and understand and apply what they're learning in the classroom and work on a real project that can deliver a real business result at the same time as helping people practice what they're learning. And so they really embed the learning for themselves and with their teams, because when you're applying these ideas and these techniques and they're being successful, then it just doesn't stay in isolation. When we go into these companies after we've been working with them for a year or two, we hear people using the kinds of terms that we've been using in our classes and new ways of thinking about the problems that they're facing. Not just the people who came to the class, but their teams and their colleagues as well. And so, examples I could mention a great one from now, actually probably about 10 years ago, but the great story was the Brazilian-based mining company was originally CBRD, now Vale. I may be saying it slightly wrong, but they came to us at MIT 10 years ago and said, what does that mean? How do we do that? And we actually really helped. Hundreds of executives came through that program and really helped them that maybe you saw in that company. They did figure out what does it mean to be a Brazilian global company, and they went out and they implemented it. And interestingly, we've done a lot with different companies and groups in financial services industry in Australia and New Zealand. And there's a great story, Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They were be customer centric. They thought about the product, and they just had products. And we worked with them over a couple of years. Some of the tools that they could use up, they transformed into now what's recognized as the most innovative bank in not only Australia but that whole part of in the Asian financial services industry. And I'm not suggesting that the legal profession is sort of a conservative or old-fashioned in that same sense, but I suspect maybe there are some similar kinds of opportunities.
Amazing. And turning back to Paul. Paul, you have been working to create new online courses in topics like AI, IoT, and management, leadership, etc. Could you tell us a little more about these courses? Who are they aimed at, and what benefits could they provide?
Yes, I'll be pleased to. Just before I do, though, I'd just like to kind of segue from one of Peter's kind of final comments there around the with regard to the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. This point around kind of transitioning from programs that we are creating are kind of focused upon preparing, of course, organizations, teams, individuals for the world in which they are going to be living and working, to be in step with their times. And I think, in essence, there are at least three kind of key relationships that need to be considered or rebalanced. The first one of those is the relationship between people and machines, in your organization, between man and machine. The second one around product and platform. That's a key relationship that, irrespective of industry, we need to look at. And then the third one is around the relationship between the individual and the collective, the kind of me versus we type of conversation. And I think any of the programs, or all of the programs that we're actually creating in the online space, they are aimed at helping certain aspects of those kind of recalibrations, those rebalancing of the relationships. So the AI program that focuses on the business implications of AI, the IoT program, which aims ensuring that organizations understand what's happening around them and are also able to improve their capabilities and competencies from a digital mastery and digital leadership perspective. I think these programs and the other ones in the portfolio that we're creating and will create in the near future around blockchain and a series of other digital business elements, they are aimed at making sure that this management population, irrespective of industry or location, are actually able to make the most of the opportunities that digital and digital transformation can provide them with. As I've said before, one of the first steps in all of our programs of this type is to demystify and give people the confidence to actually use a taxonomy and a vocabulary and a language that allows them to apply these breakthrough insights to their own individual set of realities. So we're not for one moment kind of saying, well, here's the AI story or the IoT story. Go and kind of apply that in your businesses. We are saying that these are the considerations that need to be taken into mind with these technologies. And these are the ways in which you might potentially be able to best harness them for your organization. Let's also kind of get practicing with this, start applying them, and so that you kind of, by definition, as you use them more and more often, you become more dexterous and more fluent with them, and you get the greater confidence. So it's more than simply providing a toolkit. It's kind of providing people with the confidence to use it in the right way, if that makes sense.
Great. Turning back to Peter again, and turning a little more to Brazil now, I'd like to ask you a question, Peter. Brazil is a peculiar environment for IoT. A recent research that involved many countries on various continents showed that Brazilian people are among those who we are what we could call early adopters. Brazilians are therefore willing to provide their data if they believe that this will make their lives easier. At the same time, we have no data protection law, unlike our neighbors of Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We are a country of more than 200 million people, but 1/3 of our population is offline. How do you see the possibilities and risks on the spread of IoT in such environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of different issues and questions in that one. And I think what you end, which is there is this idea in many countries actually of a digital divide that. And I think there are two dimensions to the digital divide. One is whether people, as you said, are online or offline, and whether they have access from that point of view. The other dimension is just whether people have sort of the familiarity and capability and the skills to be able to live and work in the digital society. And I think this is potentially going to create to accentuate differences that already exist. And on the one hand, it may enable greater success for the people and for the countries that are more connected. And some countries have really enacted policies and objectives to make sure that everybody really is having access to this new digital society and this digital economy, and others are not. And I think it's a very dangerous development for societies to allow that rift to widen. I think it's we all need to work hard to make sure that these benefits are really being made available to everyone. I think in terms of on the other hand, in a country of 200 million people, if 2/3 are online, that's a pretty big market. I think that's...
It's a lot of information for IoT
yes.
already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that I think that, the U.S. historically has had a bit of a natural advantage because we have a large domestic market for a lot of the businesses and industries that have developed here. And so I think that, in many ways, it sounds like Brazil perhaps has a large domestic market for IoT-based new businesses. And even though we talk about frequently, there's still also a very viable and maybe successful business model of developing in your home market. One of the things about the IoT-based business opportunities, I think, though, and this is good for countries like Brazil, is that unlike maybe some prior waves of business and industry innovation, actually, on the one hand, as you said, a third of people aren't connected, aren't online, but actually the investments that you require to build a new economy around digital are getting smaller and smaller in terms of the costs of the difficulties of implementing technology. So one example, would be in the US and in a lot of Europe, we're actually connected, in not very good ways. I'm thankful that it's working because I'm talking to you via my cable company. That's the only way I've got to connect because that infrastructure was all put in decades ago here. If you look at countries that didn't have that infrastructure and now they're digitizing, they're putting in all high bandwidth mobile infrastructure. And that's actually in many ways providing them with great advantages. So if I think about Brazil, even though you right now have, as you tell me, a third not connected or offline, getting that third connected in many ways is easier for Brazil than it is for the USA to get our last 10% or 15% connected in the US. And so I think that the question then might be, in the past, it was public policy. You had to sort of connect everyone. Question, will the markets do that in relation to the kinds of new businesses that IoT enables, because customers and consumers want to be connected. I mean, if you travel around the world and the infrastructure is there, I think, even if you're in a fairly part of Brazil, I would imagine that the technology, the connectivity is going to come. So I would be less concerned about the technological capability to be connected. I'd be more concerned about, the social element of the digital divide. And, in some ways, I think, I would say this, I work in education. Our education system has to be able to create our citizens and our workers of the future. And we could do a whole extra panel on what that needs, but I would say that the single most important thing it needs, it goes back to my point about the pace of change. We need people who are able to keep learning through their whole life, to recognize that maybe their profession, their career, is going to change dramatically several times during their lifetime. And by the way, technology might be poised to increase our lifetimes as well, and so that's even more change that we have to be able to deal with. And so I think it's about individuals, organizations, societies being able to learn and adapt. And this is the good news is. This is perhaps why human beings have been so successful on this planet, is we have the ability to do that. We're unique probably in our ability to do that, but we have to do it.
Great. And turning a little more to the judiciary system, and still talking about IoT, I'd like to ask you about the effects of IoT in the judiciary. I mean, as we know, the spread of IoT will gather massive amounts of data about ourselves. And do you believe the gathering of this information might impact the way the judiciary operates? In other words, do you see it as an opportunity, for example, if all this information is used in discovery to help adjudicate a dispute more fairly or more precisely, or do you see it as a risk that it might make discovery be more intrusive than ever? Do you think we should develop guidelines for courts and legal practitioners in what concerns the use of information storage in IoT? And do you think this moment should be now, or we should wait?
I think you have to have guidelines, and I think all of the possibilities that you're suggesting are true and are going to happen. One analogy that might be helpful to think about would be to look at sports. Think about how technology is impacting sports. On the one hand, it's helping people cheat, in a variety of ways, and so getting unfair enhancements, or at least enhancements that some people think are, most people probably think are unfair. On the other hand, it's really impacted judicial decision making in sports, which we call refereeing. You think now in more and more sports settings, we're integrating actually IoT kinds of technologies to help the officials make, we think, more accurate decisions, based on more data, based on more evidence. And I think there's a direct analogy for the judiciary there. It's, on the other hand, what happens now in many of these sporting events is that after a goal is scored or a touchdown in American football, or an out is called in baseball, in soccer we're seeing, when a penalty is called, now we have to stop and wait for the decision back to the players. I don't want to overwork this analogy, but I think that if you think about how could that work in the court system, you imagine in your courtroom, at some moment, saying, "Well, hang on a second, what just happened here?" Not only in terms of the data you might be bringing in from from events in the past that you're discussing, but I could even imagine, how does that affect the conduct of the court itself? I think that in your courtroom, or in most courtrooms, I think in most systems, there's a sense that the plaintiffs are arguing in front of a judge, and there's something about the nature and how they're prepared for that argument, and how they present the data, the evidence in that case. Well, you know, making their case. Yeah, I think that if the system doesn't decide how, you know, what's allowable and what's not allowable in those kinds of contexts, then you're going to find entrepreneurial law that they can. And you know, as a judge, will you even know what they're, you know, what techniques that they're trying to use to trick you?
It's complicated, isn't it?
You have to come to MIT. This is the conclusion. Come to MIT and we'll help you think about these issues.
Thank you. So now I'll go back to Paul. Paul, recently the American Bar Association has adopted amendments to the rules of professional conduct to say that a lawyer should keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. Many people in the audience are lawyers that, like me, did not have a tech education at law school and are uncertain about the future of their profession. As an education expert, what piece of advice could you give us? And how do we reprogram ourselves to face the new challenges and perspectives that technology poses to the legal system? Do you believe the Brazilian Bar Association has a centralized role to play in this field, for example, organizing courses or providing somehow education? Or do you think this should come from each of us? I mean, we should go and try to do something while we have some time.
So, again, kind of very good set of questions. Just before I kind of get into them, though, I just want to kind of take a moment to focus on something that you just said, kind of between questions, around this all being complicated. Yeah. So, you know, in one way, perhaps it is, but perhaps, if you don't mind, the guidance that we might suggest is that one way to deal with the complexity is to embark on a series of experiments, you know, kind of break this down into more manageable chunks. From a digital capability perspective at MIT Sloan with Peter and the team, one of the approaches that we adopt is very much around, you know, exploring, firstly, to identify hypotheses or positions or perspectives that we think can be valuable, and then experimenting on them. You know, very short, kind of rapid types of experiments where we try to figure out kind of one variable in a given equation or formula, yeah? Whether that be working with an avatar-based technology, with robotics, with various platforms, whatever it is, we try to keep it very simple and work on individual experiments that help us move forward, yeah? Wherever there's complexity, we try to kind of counter that with a very deliberate approach, yeah? So I just wanted to kind of make that point while it was still in my mind, Isabella, yeah? Now, with regard to your actual kind of questions, this exciting for me, of course, this idea of continually evolving and lifelong learning and the responsibility that each of us has. I think, firstly, I would say that from a technology perspective, I tend, or a number of people in this field would tend to go with a decentralized type of position, in the sense that what we're seeing, broadly speaking, in lots of digital areas is really a transition from a command and control to a cultivate and collaborate type of philosophy. And I think at times when one dictates a certain agenda in this space, it can actually be counterproductive, yeah? It's very important to, you say that kind of yourself and your colleagues weren't given a technology kind of education, but I would kind of argue that probably outside of work, you use a lot more technology, or use technology in a lot of different ways that perhaps are a little bit problematic within the four walls of your industry. So perhaps it's a little bit about deconstructing some of those barriers that we have today around the way that we use technology. I think, kind of going back on my own comment here, I think a little bit of centralization in terms of an acceptance that this is a standard type of practice within your industry around continued education and improvement and understanding of technology. I think that would be a good thing. But ultimately, this all boils down to the individual, yeah, and the culture of the industry, yeah, around actually embracing the opportunities and accepting, yeah, this is a little bit tricky in some areas, and there are elements of change, and that's a bit kind of disturbing and everything else, but the opportunities and the benefits so far outweigh the potential kind of all of this, that it's in everybody's interest to push forward. I would very much, and I can tell from the conversations that Peter and I have had with yourself and Bruno already, that this kind of imagination, the creativity, the desire kind of to be moving forward is something that's very real for all of you. And I think that's what needs to be tapped into, yeah? That's the starting point for all of this. You know, as you look potentially at the rebalancing of some of those relationships that I mentioned, man and machine, products, portfolio, individual and collective groups, what is it that we can experiment with? Where can we start? Where can we actually start to track our own development and improvements? What are the things that we need to know? What are the things that we need to share, yeah, within kind of our kind of ecosystem, with our colleagues, with our clients? You know, this idea that I mentioned before around teams of teams, it's not meant to be just on kind of one side of the platform. It's very much meant to be, how do you interact? How does your industry interact with everybody? Yeah, whether it's your clients, whether it's other parts of the system. So I'm not sure if that's very helpful, Isabella.
It is.
But it's meant to be just kind of a bit of a call to arms about we own the responsibility ourselves.
Great, wonderful. So my last question is addressed to both of you, and it's about a topic that is calling my attention increasingly. Online courts. Brazil's system of justice is facing a great challenge. We have much more suits than we can reasonably solve. According to a 2016 National Council of Justice report, by the end of 2015, there were 74 million pending lawsuits in Brazil, 2 million more than in the previous year. So our situation is bad, and it seems to be getting worse with time. We have one suit to every 3 inhabitants. And to make a comparison, Italy, which is a very litigious country, has one suit for every 14 inhabitants. In UK, where Paul lives, the ODR advisory group to the Council of Justice, led by Professor Richard Susskind, has recommended the establishment of an online court to settle disputes up to £25,000. This online court would be responsible for, first, online evaluating the disputes, diagnosing the problem, and helping the parties to understand their situation and their options through software. Second, online facilitation, using tools of online negotiation to allow settlements. And for those who haven't settled, third, online decision that should be delivered by a flesh and blood judge, but to whom the parties will communicate through phone or video conference if it's more convenient. This court is expected to 2020, so it's almost already there. In some U.S. states, risk assessment algorithms are already helping criminal judges to decide cases of bail, even if nobody knows how they operate. Do you believe the judiciary that does better with the litigation that permeates our society?
Peter, you okay if I perhaps start? Or so, just to begin with, very interesting kind of point and opportunity. One of the starting points for me would be to look at what we've seen in the health and medical industries around the way that technology is harnessed in those areas to reduce weight in some pressure on the system, but also to kind of allow for certain efficiencies. So I think we're all aware of some of the things that we see, types of things, as well as online kind of opportunities for consultation, etc., etc. So I think that's an interesting option or kind of analogy there. When it comes to the $25,000 kind of mark, I of course don't have the experience or the expertise to comment upon where the line should sit. But I do feel that there are a number of opportunities to harness technology to drive efficiencies. Yeah, and as I said before, perhaps experimentation, very deliberate experimentation in certain areas, may create the data points and the data sets to validate certain hypotheses, or theories. So I think it's definitely ripe for investigation, but it would need to be done, of course, with the requisite diplomacy and tact and positioning. Yeah. Peter, you may be on mute.
As I've been thinking about it, I might have a slightly contrarian answer to your question, and that's, if you want to reduce the amount of litigation that's happening, well, let me think of a different analogy. If you want to reduce the amount of traffic that you have on a road, do you build a bigger road, or does that just make more traffic?
Yeah, that's the problem. IoT will bring us a lot of disputes, and I was hoping that IoT could help us, and AI also, to help us settle something.
Yes.
But
yeah, so I think, if I may, I think the question might be, I would say what we have to try to figure out is how to reduce the number of disputes, even though IoT, for example, is going to create conditions where the number of disputes could increase. I think once you've got to the point of having a dispute, if we use technology to make it easy to prosecute that dispute, then that might just encourage more disputes, because it's pretty easy for me to file an electronic claim against somebody, see what happens. Right? That might become a self-fulfilling kind of feedback loop that will just run out of control, and will never be able to be in the system unless maybe we hand over the decisions completely to the AI and to the computers, and they have unlimited capacity relative to people. So I think instead I would say, well, what are the things that we could focus on that would reduce the number of disputes in the first place, even as we're getting into these more complicated, multi-party, apparently risky kinds of situations. And I think maybe there's something around the concept, for example, of smart contracts, which are technology enabled, that really disputes, because they, from a legal theory point of view, increase the likelihood that you've had a true, fully informed meeting of minds on every contract. Everybody goes into it knowing exactly everything that they need to know, to make it impossible for them really to then claim that actually I didn't know something, or they cheated, or they didn't do what they said they would. So I think that's how what we should be looking at for how can we use these technologies, and can actually, the legal and the judicial system, who, let's not underestimate the wealth of experience about what goes wrong, why it goes wrong, how it goes wrong. If only in front of me right now. And so how can we use that all of the discussion, or the beginning of the contract, so that your wisdom, and now we don't have the problem at the back end. And as I say that, it makes me think this, if we do that right, it doesn't put me Has you been involved? That's where the productivity problem.
So Peter, you're suggesting rather than smart contracts, actually wise contracts.
Yes.
Thank you very much, professors. That was my last question. I'd like to thank you once more for the insightful conversation. And now I'll turn the word to Bruno again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter and Paul. It was a pleasure, again, having you here, even virtually, and I hope you have the opportunity as soon as possible to have here physically to speak to us again. So thank you very much again for your time, and it was a pleasure to have you here at our conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bom, pessoal, muito obrigado pela paciência de todos, por esses problemas técnicos de início, né? Mas depois, com o famoso jeitinho brasileiro, a coisa pegou no tranco e foi. Nós não abrimos para perguntas em virtude desses problemas técnicos e do adiantado da hora, que daqui a 20 minutos nós temos o segundo painel. Mas eu me comprometo a encaminhar as perguntas, se alguém que tiver alguma pergunta para fazer, tanto para o Peter quanto para o Paul, eu fico com esse compromisso de repassar as perguntas e encaminhar a vocês a resposta por e-mail. Depois vai ser um prazer fazer essa ponte. Agradeço muito a Isabela, a gente começou o painel na pressa, em virtude deles já estarem conectados. Isabela, que é juíza federal e ajudou muito a organizar esse primeiro painel. Então, agradeço muito, Isabela, não só a organização, mas também a participação com as perguntas e a participação no debate. Foi um prazer ter você conosco.
Agradeço, o prazer foi meu.
Muito obrigado. Então vamos fazer um intervalo, um coffee breakzinho, tem um biscoito, um café para quem quiser. A gente volta daqui a 20 minutos. Obrigado.
Tô cheio de coisa aqui. Foi fundamental.